Hello, welcome back to another vid. So this is another vinyl pickups vid. Technically, it's a pickups vid which relates to October, but of course here we are, early November, and all this means is that, well, apart from not doing one last month, I'm going to do two this month. Maybe the other one will be right at the end of the month, there or thereabouts, we'll see. So yeah, I've got 5 records altogether, careful not to show you what they are. And yeah, I'm really pleased with all of them, as I would be. Obviously, I wouldn't be buying them and I wouldn't be showing them. So let's dive on straight in there with The Cure. This is Disintegration from 1989. And if I fold it out here, nice little kind of gatefold, and this thing will drop out. Is anyone else, I think I touched upon this in a previous vid, is anyone else the same? You kind of keep the covers for whatever reason, especially if there's like a sticker on. You know, I don't throw them out. It's absolutely odd, really. But I just like to do it. Usually what I do is I put these in these kind of like protective sleeves, but I've just been listening to this, so I haven't had time yet. In fact, I don't think any of these are in protective sleeves, but I will do eventually. It's just something I like to do, stick them behind me on the shelf there, and when you're going through them as well, when you're flicking through them when they've got that sleeve on, it's almost like being in a record store. It reminds me of being in a record shop when I was a kid, probably invariably with my dad, and probably not really into music back then, just waiting for him to get a move on. But while he was looking, I'd be flicking through them as well. That kind of feel when you're skipping back and forth, it's really kind of personal and just nostalgic, brilliant. But anyway, yes, so The Cure. Now, The Cure are one of those bands, one of many bands really, that I do like, but I've got to be honest, I'm not fully au fait with their back catalogue, not particularly. I mean, I know all their hits, of course I do. It's very hard not to, because I had so much airplay over the years. But in terms of sitting down and listening to an album, no, not particularly. I do have a couple of CDs that they've got, which I've had for years on end. And I have listened to them, but because it's on a CD, much like for me, digital music with like Spotify, which I do use a lot, but what I find is I skip through all the tracks. I listen to it for 10, 20 seconds, maybe a bit more. But if it doesn't instantly grab me, it's just so easy just to click on the next one. Whereas, as we all know, if you put a vinyl on, you're much more inclined to sit down and actually listen to it and appreciate it and to get it and understand what it's all about. And that's what I'm finding. So I'm really pleased that I'm actually getting into The Cure properly now, rather than just knowing them for their hits. With that said, my favourite tracks so far are, coincidentally or not, the singles. So Picture of You, Love Song, Lullaby, Fascination Street, really strong tracks. Now, I deliberately went with this one for my first introduction to The Cure in terms of vinyl and really trying to get into them. As I say, because I do have a couple of CDs. I went on for this one deliberately for a couple of reasons. One, because it's right at the end of the 80s. It came out in 1989, and I thought it's a good way to kind of sum The Cure up until that point. You know, it's a nice cut-off date, you know, coming up to like a new decade, up until like 1990. So there was that. Also, I had heard from Wikipedia, so obviously it's right, never wrong, Wikipedia, that it was an interesting album from the perspective of the singer, Robert Smith, of course, because he was about to turn 30, or did turn 30, during 1989. So it was a really kind of reflective time for him. You know, at the start of a new decade, turning 30 is a big deal, like it is when you turn any decade, I guess, even if it's more of a psychological thing than anything else. But I thought, as a person, as a songwriter, as he was back then, it would be an interesting insight into his kind of personality and his songwriting and where it was taking him. And the last reason, which I've just thought of as well, although at the time this was a reason behind picking this one up, is that by all accounts, it was an album which kind of went back to their kind of gothic roots, if you like. From what I understand, the previous maybe couple of albums in particular had taken on more of like a pop edge to it, you know, very radio-friendly, kind of top-of-the-pops kind of material, trying to appeal to everybody. And this kind of took a little bit of a step backwards. It was still radio-friendly. I mean, tracks like, you know, the Lullaby and Pictures of You, they've still obviously received a lot of airtime and heavy play on radio stations up and down the land and the world, for that matter. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting aspect for them to go back to this kind of gothic kind of sound, which I do quite like. So yeah, really looking forward to getting into this properly. Obviously, I put it on a couple of times and listened to it. Apologies for the glare. I know I always say that. I've actually got the light on today because it's quite dark outside. It's that time of year, you know, it starts to get dark a little bit early. And even in the daytime, you know, it can be a little bit dark. So that's why the light's on. It wouldn't be pitch black if I turned it off. I've just tried to make it that little bit lighter. So yeah, really pleased to get it, and that's the Cure Disintegration from 1989. So we'll stick that one there for now. Now the next one is an interesting one because this is by a band called the Style Council. The Style Council, of course, featuring Paul Weller, who was more famous for, although there were no, small band, the Style Council, but Paul Weller, more famous for being in the Jam from the late 70s up until the early 80s, like the mod scene and all that kind of thing, which I love. I do love the Jam, and I will, obviously, as time goes by, pick up records for them, I'm sure. In fact, no doubt about it, I will. But the Style Council is something he formed after the Jam, and it obviously takes on a very different kind of genre and style, very kind of soul-driven and blues-esque, and it's so good. Now, the interesting thing with this album, it's called Introducing the Style Council. It's actually a mini LP. In fact, you can see down there, it says it. But even more interesting than that is the fact that it didn't actually come out, curiously, in the UK. I know it received a lot of importing from Holland to people in the UK, obviously way, way, way before the internet. And Holland, Germany, I'm guessing, and elsewhere, mainland Europe. But for whatever reason, it didn't get a release in the United Kingdom up until now, or maybe latterly, actually, it did. But at the time, when it came out back in 1983. So really pleased to get this. Now, this record, in fact, all the Style Council's back catalogue, their discography, has been re-released. And this is the re-release. And what I like about it is all of them have been reissued on coloured vinyl, all different colours as well. So this particular one is a really striking kind of purple, very, almost like pink really, but it looks really, really nice. It looks a lot darker there on the picture or on the camera on screen than it does when I'm looking at it here. But it kind of rotates a little bit as you look at it at the light. Or reflects, I should say. It looks very, very nice. So I'm pleased to get that one. Now, if you're aware of the Style Council, particularly this particular album, you will know songs like Long Hot Summer and Speak Like a Child. Those, I guess, are probably the ones you'll know. But yeah, so it's a mini album. I think there's only 8 songs on here. And one of them is a mix by the looks of things, which is, Long Hot Summer. So really pleased to get it. I've already ordered another one, which technically is their first album. Because like I say, this is a mini LP, and it didn't come out in the UK. Their first album, which came out probably later this year, 83, or maybe it might have been 84, I'd have to check, was called Cafe Bleu. And yeah, so that will be on my pickup video at the end of this month, in November. So yeah, spoiler alert there. So really pleased to get it. Listen to it a little bit, and yeah, I really do like it. But it is, of course, in stark contrast to the Jam. But I like Paul Weller. He's a bit of a genius, really, isn't he? And he's pretty cool. He looks pretty cool still. Always will. So that's that. Right, next up is a band. Now, I don't know where I heard this band. This is a new album that came out in 2017. So, just quite recently. Well, this year, clearly. I believe it's their 4th band. Now, this band, to my knowledge, like I said, I don't know anything about them up until recently, but it appears as if they've got a bit of a checkered past. Their former drummer, so not the drummer on this one, I think he was on the previous 2 or 3 albums, he passed away, which was staggeringly sad, of course, because he must have been very young. And also, I believe the singer was arrested going back, again, this is going back a good few years, maybe 7 years, but he was arrested for battery. I believe the charges were dropped, so you make of that what you will. Maybe he was guilty, maybe he wasn't. I guess in a court of law, maybe he wasn't, but maybe he got off on a technicality. I've no idea. But anyway, so not judging them for what's happened in the past or the unfortunate circumstances, I heard a song called Snowdonia. Now, the band are called Surfer Blood. The actual album is called Snowdonia. I do like the album. Look at that cover. It's like the iceberg. It looks really nice. Very kind of cold, but also kind of like warm and inviting, right? Weird kind of contrast. And it's, in a way, it's a mini album because there's only 8 tracks on there. But if you look at the tracks there you can see Snowdonia on the top there, on the right or the left. How is this going to be like a mirror reflection? Not really sure. So now it starts off really strong for me. Matter of Time, Frozen, Dino J, Six Flags in F or G, Snowdonia and Instant Doppelgangers are really good tracks. I'm not massively keen thus far on the last 2 tracks, which are Taking Care of Eddie and Carrier Pigeon, but maybe I'll get into them over time. Apologies for keep touching my glasses, by the way. I really need them tightened. They keep falling off. So maybe I'll just not wear them for future feeds until they're tightened. But yeah, so I heard Snowdonia, and I can't remember where I heard it, whether it was just maybe on YouTube by chance, or maybe it was on Spotify and recommended, or maybe someone told me to check it out. But I heard Snowdonia, the self-titled track, and I thought it was really, really good. It's a weird track, though, because it's almost like several tracks put together in one. There's several different parts of it where it's so disconnected, but it somehow manages to work. And probably maybe halfway through the song, it takes another turn, and where the singer kind of does his very best John Lennon The Word, if you know that song by the Beatles, his very best The Word impression. It sounds like that song is using those lyrics. It sounds very kind of Beatles-esque. And yeah, but it's a weird kind of amalgamation of several different tracks and songs and sounds, but I really, really like it. So that's probably, I don't think it's the best song on the album, but it's the most interesting one. So what I'm going to do, as ever, in the description box, I'll put a link to a track from every album, and I may, if I remember, mention this at the end of the vid, like I usually do. But I'll probably use Snowdonia, so listen to it. And don't just listen to the first like 30 seconds or 60 seconds. You know, do listen to the whole song, or most of it, because you'll see what I mean, where it is several different tracks rolled into one. So basically the album is essentially like a surfer kind of pop, if you like, surf rock kind of music. So if you like that kind of thing, it's very melodic, it's very catchy, it's a kind of thing which, you know, it's very common. A lot of bands do release these kind of tracks, these kind of records, but maybe they don't get a lot of airplay. And I don't know why, because some of them are very kind of radio friendly in that kind of collegey way. Maybe a college student kind of radio station would have a field day with these, but when it comes to mainstream, perhaps not. So anyway, that's Snowdonia. It's their 4th album, and yeah, came out this year, and it's really, really good if you like those kind of very catchy surf rock melodic kind of tracks. So check it out, see what you think. Okay, so there's 2 left. Now, this one is actually still sealed, but I'm going to have to take these glasses off in a second. It's got really light all of a sudden. Yeah, it's still sealed, but I have listened to it. I did have it, you know, back in the day. In fact, there you go, you can see it. It's the Foo Fighters, a self-titled album from 1995. I did buy it back in 1995, and I've obviously in recent days been listening to it on Spotify and a little bit on YouTube as well. I think I may still actually have the CD for it somewhere. So I picked this up recently. It's quite cheap, actually, only about sort of $15, which is around about 10, 11, 12 pounds. So still sealed. It won't be for much longer. I'm not going for a sealed collection or anything crazy like that. But there is something satisfying about keeping it sealed. Yeah, it feels really good. I hope this doesn't set me off to like having a load of sealed vinyl. It definitely shouldn't. I'm not going to do that. That's madness. Madness, another band I need to get into. I love Madness. Maybe next year we'll do that one. I've been listening to them actually quite recently. Love a bit of Madness, a little bit of ska and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, I digress. So yeah, the curious thing about this, obviously, after the demise, the unfortunate, terrible way that Nirvana finished with Kurt Cobain obviously passing away in terrible circumstances. Dave Grohl, at the time, he had a lot of offers to join a load of bands, but they all wanted him to join, understandably, I guess, as a drummer. And for him, I think it was just too much. You know, we've gone through the tragedy of how, excuse me, how Nirvana ended. I need a swig. Thought I was going to get away with it. Obviously not. But he'd gone through the tragedy of how Nirvana ended. And I think the last thing he wanted to do was to sit behind, you know, a drum kit permanently and, again, go back to being a full-time drummer. So what he did, he took a bit of time out, and although not that long in the scheme of things, because this came out in 95 and Kurt Cobain died in 1994, April 94, wasn't it? So he basically had a load of tracks which he'd written them all himself. He played all the instruments, he recorded it, he co-produced it, I believe. He basically pretty much did everything, obviously all the vocals as well. I believe there might be 1 or 2 tracks, I think it's only 1, but 1 or 2 where somebody did help him out with the recording. But apart from that, it's basically all his own work, all the tracks recorded, produced, written, played, all the instruments, and it's an incredible achievement. And also it's an interesting insight into potentially, because you'd imagine most, if not all of these, would have been written around about the time he was still in a band with Kurt Cobain, still in Nirvana. So it's maybe a potential insight, we'll never know, but into how Nirvana's next album would have sounded. If anything, because it's different to Nirvana, but obviously retains that a similar, in a sense, kind of sound. But also when you take into consideration that Kurt Cobain was working with, or was talking about working with Michael Stipe of R.E.M., throw that into the mix, coupled with how this was going with the Foo Fighters, the debut album, and Nirvana could have taken on a different edge completely. And then, of course, take into consideration Nirvana Unplugged in New York, which is an outstanding album. And yeah, Nirvana as a band could have completely released something, left of field to what people were expecting. Sadly, we'll never know, but it probably would have been a really great album. But anyway, that's a Nirvana chat, I guess, for a Nirvana videos in the future. So I'm really liking this album. I remember at the time, you can see at the front there, the 3 singles, Big Me, This Is a Call, and I'll Stick Around. I remember at the time, for the first time, hearing, I'll Stick Around, it would have been This Is a Call. And I probably would have heard it on maybe somewhere like the BBC One, The Evening Session, with Steve Lamacq and Joe Wiley. I used to really listen to that back in like the mid to late 90s, particularly the mid-90s. And as soon as I heard it, I thought, that is absolutely amazing. But of course, again, like I said before, this is all pre-internet. So I had to find it either in a shop, which I couldn't do at the time, or where I did end up getting it from was the back of either, I can't quite remember, it was either the NME or Melody Maker, one or the other. Where they have like the mail order companies, I guess, essentially. And it would list all their albums and CDs, import CDs, and clearly how much they were selling them for. You'd send off a check, and then you'd get it. So that's what I did. Well, I asked my mum at the time. I think it would have been like 17, maybe just turned 17. So I asked my mum to write out a check, gave her the money, and then a few weeks later, my This Is a Call import CD arrived, and I absolutely loved it. And then not long after, I bought the album. And I subsequently bought Big Me as a single, and I'll Stick Around. Big Me's kind of a curious single, very kind of, speaking of the Beatles before, very melodic, and sort of like a childish version of the Beatles, if you like. But I do like it, and I'll Stick Around is more of a Nirvana-esque track, if you like. So yeah, I really like it. For me, it's a good album, some really good songs on here. I particularly like things like Oh George, For All the Cows is very good. Not massively keen on the last sort of 2 or 3 tracks on the album, and 1 or 2 maybe in between. But overall, I mean, Alone and Easy Target's a good one. Yeah, it's just a really good album. And like I say, I know I'm repeating myself, but when you think Dave Grohl did it all by himself, and with no real experience of being a songwriter, I know he did that song on a B-side to, was it Heart Shaped Box? I think it was, called Marigold. Or was it All Apologies? No, I think it was Heart Shaped Box. And he sang that song, and I'm not sure if he played the guitar as well. But that's kind of a very catchy song as well. So that was maybe a bit of an indication that he had that talent, to sing songs and to be a songwriter, but and to play all the instruments as well. But yeah, who'd have thought? Who'd have thought Dave Grohl, ex-Nirvana drummer, would kind of almost leave that behind, well, like he had to do, and forge a completely new, mega successful career as a frontman in another band, the Foo Fighters. So yeah, at the same time, I've got to be honest, the Foo Fighters are a band that I've never really massively got into. I love the first album, as I've just explained, and I didn't mind the second one. Some really good songs that I like Monkey Wrench, which may be in their second or third album, I'm not sure. And a few others. Everlong is a decent one. Is that the one with kind of like the weird video as well? Learn to Fly. So there's several good songs that they've released, but I'd say over the last decade, I've really lost touch with them. But here's another spoiler alert. Goodness me, why am I doing this? I am going to be buying the new Foo Fighters album, maybe sometime later this month. So I imagine that'll be on that pickup speed. If not, it'll be next month. But it'll probably be the one that I do later in November. But I've got to buy it first, and then I want to listen to it. So it may be on the November pickup vid, it may not. But I heard a track, I think, is it The Sky Is My Neighborhood or something like that. This is all off the top of my head. And I really, really like it. So it may be a different kettle of fish when I buy it, and I might listen to it and think, oh, it's not that good. But the first time I heard it, I thought, yeah, I like that. So that's going to be the next Foo Fighters album that I'll get. So oddly enough, I'll then own 2, the very first one and then the latest one, and I've skipped everything in between. But as time goes by, I will get back into it. And then last up but not least is an absolute classic. I believe this came out actually in October, so last month, 22 years ago. 22 years ago, how does that happen? It's just unbelievable. That album is Oasis, What's the Story, Morning Glory. An absolute classic, like I say, and I just love it. I remember buying it back in October of 1995. In fact, I think technically I bought it in November. Now, if any of you are watching my diary vids, let me try and fold this out here. If any of you are watching my diary vids, and I did one the other day, oddly enough, that's from 1995, I mention Oasis quite a lot because I was absolutely obsessed with them. And Yeah, it's funny with me because obviously a lot of people, when they think of Oasis and when they talk about Oasis, they say the classic cliche for me, the stereotype, if you like, which I've never believed in personally, maybe because I'm still a bit of a fanboy all these years later, but they'll tell you that they all sound the same. Oasis, all their albums sound the same. I don't think they do. I didn't think so at the time, and I think so less as I get older. If you look at Definitely Maybe, it doesn't sound anything like Morning Glory. If you compare this to something like their last record, which was Dig Out Your Soul in 2008, 2009, doesn't sound anything like Definitely Maybe or Morning Glory. There are elements, of course, you'd expect that. It's the same songwriter after all, predominantly Noel Gallagher, with Liam, penning the occasional track here and there, particularly on kind of latter albums. But yeah, I was one of those, and am one of those weird people who kind of, now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying their later stuff was better, although that's very subjective. But for me, I'm one of those people, a rare breed, who I liked Oasis's album. Every one they released, I liked it. I was one of those fans who, I moved with the times. I moved with them. So I love things like Be Here Now, which got a lot of criticism at the time and still does now. I know Noel has slagged it off in the past himself. Liam loves it. And yeah, I love it. I think it's a brilliant album. Standing on the Shoulder of Giants is an amazing album. All right, there's a couple of tracks on there which are not that great, but generally I really, really like the album. And everything they've done, Heathen Chemistry, Don't Believe the Truth. I like Oasis as a band, and I do genuinely think they evolved. I know a lot of people don't think they do, but yeah, we're obviously not going to disagree. We're not going to disagree. We are going to disagree. We're not going to agree with that, but that's fine, maybe I will admit it's that kind of rose-tinted glasses, literally, fanboyism, because back in the mid-90s, I was obsessed with Oasis. They're a great, great band, and the Northern band as well, so I was really into them. And I was into Blur as well, to be fair. So I was just into the whole kind of Britpop scene. So What's a Story, Morning Glory, a fantastic album. The funny thing about this as well is that it comes with a track on side 2, track number 4, Bonehead's Bank Holiday. Now, that wasn't on the original release. I believe, I'm possibly wrong on this one, but I believe it was on the Japanese edition, the import CD, but I stand corrected. And maybe it was on like limited edition CDs, all that kind of stuff. But it wasn't on the original British release back in the day. But it is on this one. So, yeah, some fantastic tracks. Champagne Supernova. Who doesn't like Champagne Supernova? Morning Glory is a good track. She's Electric. Cast No Shadow. Some might say, Hey Now, Don't Look Back in Anger. Wonderwall, Hello, Roll With It. I'm just going through the whole set list because it is absolutely fantastic. A brilliant album. And the cover as well, the back cover as well, the front cover. It's just iconic. Now, if you're not an Oasis fan, if you don't like them, if you don't like, the Gallagher brothers... And, they are a little bit arrogant, although I do think they're living up to it a lot, of course they are, just for being on TV and getting the attention, all the rest of it. But also a lot of it is just how they are. Coming from my neck of the woods as well, not too far. That's just how people are up north. You just like that. You're very cocky, you're kind of arrogant, but not in a nasty way. It's just in a humorous way. And I think maybe a lot of people took it the wrong way. They took it like as if they're being serious, and half the time they're just messing around. It really isn't as arrogant as it comes across. I don't think it is anyway. Because it just reminds me of my family. They're not arrogant, but, they say a lot of things like that. I do. But it's just maybe just a very northern thing, or maybe it isn't. Maybe I'm talking nonsense there. But yeah, even if you're not an Oasis fan, you can't say that they haven't been an extremely important band in British music, but also in worldwide music. Who doesn't like Wonderwall? Who doesn't like Wonderwall? Come on. Amazing, amazing song. And a fantastic band. So anyway, that's enough Oasis preaching. You'll either like them or you don't. There's the 5 records that I've got. Next month or later on this month, I will have another vid. Now, on this particular vid, what I was going to do, I was going to show off a Blu-ray that I bought, and maybe even a book or two, but I haven't fully finished reading the books, and I haven't even started watching the Blu-ray, so there's no point showing it and saying, oh, this is what it is. I'd rather watch it and then tell you what I think of it. It's much more... It's just much better, isn't it, doing it that way? And then you may be inclined to go out and buy it from me telling you what I think, rather than just holding it up. It's a little bit there's no character behind that, is that? It's a bit boring. So thank you for watching. Again, check out the description box. I will have a track from each album, not necessarily the best one, but maybe just one that I like, which I think you may find interesting. Obviously, I'll be very surprised if you don't know who the likes of The Cure, Oasis, the Foo Fighters, and maybe even the Style Council are, but you probably, I don't mean to sound patronising, but you possibly wouldn't have heard of Surfer Blood, or most people wouldn't have heard of. Maybe you have, but most people haven't. And maybe the Style Council may be one that's kind of passed you by, and you may hear the song and think, oh yeah, actually I do know who they are. It's Paul Weller. Come on, it's the Jam. Everybody loves Paul Weller. Until my next vid, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.